Disclaimer. The following is a fan-made production. Lorekeeper Studios does not claim to own any of the characters, locations, or scenarios found within the Hyrule Warriors game or the Legend of Zelda series. All such rights are reserved by their respective owners. This production is made out of a love for the stories that have already been told, and we encourage you to support the original products. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
The Angel of Destiny, Episode 1, Psychostorm. Chapter 2, The Battle of Youth. The following is a continuation of the account residing in Tycalra's journal.
I couldn't tell if the captain was being serious or not. Hyrule? That can't be right. Hyrule is a fictional world from a video game series.
Unfortunately, I do not possess the information that would be able to explain this to you. That information is reserved for the royal family, so Princess Zelda could. Once we finish our work here and the point is secure, then we will be sure to take you to her.
I looked around, wondering what he meant by securing this point. There were no visible threats, at least that I could see, and up to this point nothing particularly dangerous had happened. Almost as if reading my thoughts, Captain Bargain began to address my confusion.
You're lucky we got here when we did. We received word that Sia's armies were approaching this point. We immediately rushed here as fast as we could.
It was at this particular moment that I made a horrible realization. We hadn't just been pulled into a fictional world by some magic beam of light. We had been pulled right into the middle of a war. I was talking directly to the Hylian army, and they were supposedly going to protect us from a threat that we had no way of even comprehending. I realize now that I probably should have made this connection sooner, but I think the reason I did it had something to do with the fact that the presence of a large group of medieval soldiers was being superseded by a ton of other issues. I turned back to look at my fellow students, only to notice a handful of them having already come to the same horrific conclusion. None of us had signed up for anything like this. We were entirely unprepared and untrained to deal with anything of this magnitude. I turned back to Captain Bargain and noticed a lesser soldier speaking to him. The soldier spoke softly, so I was unable to make out what it was he said, but I could tell by the captain's expression that it wasn't good. Captain Bargain turned back to face me, his grim expression unchanging.
Sir, I understand that you are still very confused and that you likely have never done anything like this before. But I just received word that Sia's army is extremely close to this location and we need to take action immediately. Hylian law dictates that you are to be appointed general upon your arrival in our country, so I would like to ask you to lead the army.
I was speechless. I had no combat training, no experience in fighting, or even leading for that matter. And yet, they were asking me to lead an entire army into battle? In the end, I'm not entirely sure what convinced me to agree. Perhaps it was the desperate tone of the captain, perhaps it was the desire to protect my friends who stood behind me, or perhaps it was just the sheer curiosity of the moment. Whatever the reason, I nodded my head in agreement. The captain also nodded, this time in respectful confirmation before calling to the lesser soldiers.
Would one of you mind offering your weapon in order to arm our new general?
With his call came a host of blades raised in the air. As far as I could tell, they were all the same, likely manufactured in the same place. The captain gestured to one of the men who had raised his sword, who promptly approached, bowed, and raised his blade to offer it to me. Graciously, I accepted the gift, taking it from him and slinging the sheath over my shoulder. With a single, fluid gesture, I drew the sword, holding it out in front of me. Despite its large and cumbersome appearance, the blade seemed surprisingly light, and I was easily able to swing it around, as well as smoothly slide it back into its sheath.
What are your orders, sir?
I thought for a moment, trying my hardest to come up with a decent strategy. I had no real idea as to what I was doing. I had never come up with a legitimate battle strategy, and considering how many lives were at stake, this proved to be much more of a challenge than I would have thought. With a variety of ideas cycling through my head, I decided on a plan that I felt would result in the fewest casualties for both my fellow students and my newly acquired army. I returned back over the ring in order to announce my plan to the others who were there. As I did so, I noticed my weight returned to what I was used to. Again, I staggered, but this time I was able to catch myself. Instead of falling, I quickly turned to my classmates and informed them of my plan. I need everyone, soldiers and students alike, to organize into squads of 10. Next, I want everyone to group up with at least one equal squad of Hylians for each group of students. Stick with your group and protect each other so that no one gets hurt. Once you find your group, spread out. I want no entrances left open and no positions unguarded. I watched as my friends began to meet up and exchange greetings with these men whom they had never met in their lives, but in a way that reminded me of a greeting between close friends. To nobody's surprise, not everyone was particularly enthusiastic about listening to me, but after some brief negotiating, nearly everyone was willing to follow my instructions. After a few more basic orders, the various groups spread out across the school, completely fortifying all points of entry as well as several other locations throughout the campus. As they marched into the school, I noticed several of the soldiers, Captain Barjan included, lose their balance in a similar way to myself the moment they crossed the ring, but most of them quickly made it back on their feet and continued their march. Having several first-hand experiences, I figured that this would likely affect our opponents as well, and immediately began thinking of a way we could use it to our advantage. The captain and I headed to the roof with a number of archers to better assess the situation, as well as add some long-range fortification to our position. We gazed out across the barren, deserted landscape to see exactly what we were up against. While it was difficult to make out through the heavy rain, we were able to see a host of strange creatures advancing towards us. The captain quickly identified them as Sia's army of monsters. I called down to my armies below, warning them of the approaching threat, and ordered the archers to prepare their bows for an opening attack. They all loaded their weapons and aimed them upwards, setting up for an arching strike that would hopefully deal a serious blow to their forces. Then, we waited for the enemy to come in range. For this brief moment, everything stopped. The commotion of preparation had ended, and every single person was holding their breath in anticipation for the battle that would soon take place. The world fell silent to the point that the only sounds were the gentle patter of the now fading rain. Fire. A flurry of arrows soared across the field, striking down nearly a third of the enemy troops. I observed the armies of the enemy as the arrows pierced them, and noticed that instead of falling to the ground, the deceased monsters simply burst into a purple dust that faded after a moment. Despite the rather sufficient loss, the enemy continued to approach with furious speed. Disregarding the previous observation, I called down to the people on ground level, warning them to be ready for the attack, and ordered my archers to fire another barrage of shots. By the time the army reached our location, their numbers had been cut down by more than 2/3 their original size. Concluding the archers' work to be done, I immediately rushed down to ground level in order to assist the armies on that floor. As soon as I touched ground again, I drew my sword and ordered everyone to wait until the enemy had crossed the ring. We continued to hold our positions, watching as the continued barrages of arrows shot down from above, taking out more and more troops with every second that passed. Finally, the enemy troops had reached the ring, and I ordered my armies to rush their location. As we ran toward the enemy, I observed them closely to see that my predictions were correct. The moment the army crossed over the ring, they lost their balance, and as a result of the sudden shift in gravity, many of the monsters fell to the ground. Capitalizing on their uncertainty, my armies began a relentless onslaught of attacks, striking down nearly every monster within their ranks. It wasn't long before we were able to completely obliterate the armies of our opponents, causing the few monsters who remained to execute a hasty retreat. Cheers rang out across the school. Students, staff, and soldiers, who were all overjoyed at our speedy triumph over the enemy, began to throw miscellaneous objects into the air. I sheathed my weapon and turned back towards the group, only to find Captain Barjan approaching me.
Congratulations, sir! How do you feel after your first major victory?
Honestly, that felt pretty good. I had no idea that...
Dodongo!
I hadn't even finished my sentence when the cry of one of the archers rang down across the school. I turned towards him, only to watch as a massive ball of fire shot from beyond my view, striking the corner of the wall where the soldier had been standing. Dozens of people rushed out of the way of the falling debris, many only narrowly avoiding its clutches. I quickly turned my head to find the origin of the explosive fireball that had nearly decimated a part of our army. Looking into the distance, I saw a massive reptilian creature emerging over the horizon.
Dodongos. I should have known Sia's army would have some sort of backup plan like this.
What do you mean? What is that thing?
That is a Dodongo, a massive fire-breathing lizard. They're incredibly powerful and their hides are nearly impossible to penetrate.
Keeping my eyes fixed on the beast, I drew my sword once more and made a motion to approach it. But before I could begin my assault, Captain Bargent grabbed me by the shoulder.
Sir, what are you doing?
There are people out there who are counting on me to finish this battle, whether they realize it or not. One way or another, I need to do this.
Of course, sir. I will follow your lead. But if you wish to take on the beast alone, I recommend you bring these with you.
He reached behind his shield and pulled out a small blue sphere with a piece of rope attached to it. I glanced at him suspiciously, considering questioning how he pulled this object seemingly out of nowhere, but decided that we didn't necessarily have the time for such inquiry. Instead, I took the ball from him and waited for further instructions.
While Dodongos have very thick hides, their insides are very susceptible to explosives. This is a bomb that will help you defeat it. If you can find a way to light it and get it to somehow damage its insides, then the day will be won.
I thanked the captain for the advice, and immediately ran off to fight the monster. As I approached it, I realized I would once again be forced to cross the mysterious ring that continually threw everyone off balance. So, instead, I prepared myself for the sudden shift in gravity. Anticipating the change, I forced the first step I took onto the foreign terrain to be stronger and more forward than any step prior, and using the increased strength from the intense gravity, I shot like a rocket at an incredible speed toward my enemy. Reaching speeds I had not previously thought attainable by any human being, I quickly approached the monster, effectively catching it off guard. Realizing how close I had gotten to it, the beast let out a piercing roar and began to breathe a steady stream of fire at me. I ducked under the flames, raising a fuse into the stream, lighting the bomb and beginning the timer of how long I had to defeat it. With the help of the surrounding rocks and my newfound strength, I catapulted myself high into the air and rotated my body to face the monster. In a frenzied rage, the beast let out another roar in my direction. Seeing what could possibly be my only chance, I hurled the lit explosive into its mouth. As the bomb entered its system, the Dodongo quickly closed its maw as to avoid getting any other foreign substances caught in its throat. Within moments, the bomb detonated, stunning the monster and knocking it onto its side. I aimed my sword downward towards the beast and began my rapid descent. Putting as much force into the blow as I could muster, I drove my blade straight into the creature's eye, avoiding its hide and cutting into its skull. The beast howled in agony and began thrashing about in a chaotic manner. I held on for my life, thrusting the sword deeper at every opportunity I had, before being thrown off the monster completely and slamming into some nearby rocks. The impact was so strong that it knocked my glasses off of my face completely. Pain shot through my body, and with now blurring vision, I watched as the creature flailed its body in agony before falling to the ground, lifeless and defeated. I sighed in relief, only to feel another bout of pain shoot through my back. Moments of silence passed as I found it harder to stay awake through all of the pain. As I sat on the ground, I heard the call of the captain and nearly a dozen other soldiers behind me. In an attempt to stand up and greet them, I instead fell to the ground and faded from consciousness.